Moscow is a city of profound history, a metropolis where the weight of the past meets the rapid progression of the modern era. Within its vast urban sprawl lie pockets of dense nature, providing a necessary respite for its millions of residents. One such sanctuary is Bitsa Park, an expansive forest located in the southwestern reaches of the city. With its winding trails, dense canopies, and quiet isolation, the park has long been a haven for families, joggers, and those seeking quiet reflection away from the concrete landscape. However, between the years 2001 and 2006, this tranquil urban forest became the epicenter of one of the most complex and tragic criminal investigations in modern history. The shadows of Bitsa Park concealed a methodical perpetrator, an individual whose actions were driven by a chilling obsession with a simple game of strategy. This is the comprehensive account of the investigation, the forensic breakthroughs, and the pursuit of justice in the case of Alexander Pichushkin, an offender whose desire to fill the 64 squares of a chessboard with human lives left an indelible scar on the community. To understand the trajectory of this investigation, it is essential to examine the psychological and environmental factors that form the foundation of such an offender. The study of forensic psychology frequently explores the intersection of early childhood development, environmental influences, and physical trauma. Alexander Pichushkin was born in 1974. In his early years, he was described by observers as a relatively ordinary child, but a significant medical event altered his developmental path. While playing on a swing, he sustained a severe head injury when the swing struck him directly on the forehead. Neurological experts and forensic psychologists have long studied the correlation between traumatic brain injuries, particularly those affecting the frontal lobe, and subsequent behavioral changes. The frontal cortex is the region of the brain responsible for executive functions, including impulse control, empathy, and the regulation of social behavior. When this area sustains significant trauma during the crucial stages of childhood development, the individual may experience profound difficulties in processing emotions and regulating aggressive impulses. Following the accident, his demeanor shifted. He became increasingly withdrawn, struggling with the social dynamics of his peer group. Recognizing his difficulties, his grandfather, a man who represented stability and affection in his life, intervened. His grandfather took a deeply active role in his upbringing, introducing him to the game of chess. Chess is a game of pure strategy, requiring foresight, patience, and the ability to view the board as a complex system of expendable pieces and calculated sacrifices. For the young boy, chess became more than a recreational activity. It became a structured environment where he could exert control and demonstrate intellectual capability. The two spent countless hours in Bitsa Park, engaging in matches against older, experienced players. This period of relative stability, however, was abruptly shattered by the unexpected passing of his grandfather. The loss of his primary emotional anchor proved catastrophic. Forensic analysts suggest that this profound grief, combined with his pre-existing neurological vulnerabilities, created a perfect storm of antisocial development. The structured, strategic worldview taught through chess began to warp, translating into a deeply distorted perspective on human life, where individuals were no longer seen as fellow human beings, but as pieces on a board, subjects to be manipulated, and ultimately removed. The geographical and sociological context of Moscow in the early 2000s played a critical role in the prolonged nature of this investigation. Following the economic and social shifts of the previous decade, a significant demographic of marginalized individuals emerged within the city. Many elderly citizens, struggling with isolation and economic hardship, as well as individuals experiencing homelessness or battling severe alcohol dependency, frequented places like Bitsa Park. In the field of criminology, there is a tragic phenomenon often referred to as the concept of the less dead. This term describes victims who exist on the fringes of society. Individuals whose disappearances may not immediately trigger a massive law enforcement response because they lack strong social networks or regular employment check-ins. The perpetrator recognized this vulnerability. The methodology he employed was deeply rooted in psychological manipulation rather than overt physical force. He would approach his targets, often older men who were isolated, and strike up a conversation. Using a disarming and sympathetic narrative, he would claim that his beloved dog had recently passed away. He would invite the individual to share a bottle of vodka to mourn the loss of the animal. In a culture where sharing a drink is a common gesture of camaraderie and condolence, this approach proved highly effective. Once the individual was intoxicated, and their spatial awareness and defensive capabilities were compromised, the perpetrator would strike. The attacks were swift and definitive, resulting in fatal trauma. Following the act, the offender utilized the geography of the park to conceal the evidence. Bitsa Park is equipped with an extensive subterranean drainage and sewer system. The perpetrator would dispose of the victims within these deep, water-filled shafts. This method of disposal presented an immense challenge for forensic investigators. When physical evidence is submerged in water, particularly in a flowing sewer system, the degradation process is accelerated. Trace evidence, such as hair, fibers, and crucial genetic material like DNA, is rapidly washed away or irrevocably contaminated. The cold, damp environment complicates the establishment of an accurate time of death, and the sheer vastness of the subterranean network meant that many individuals were not discovered until long after they had vanished. For a significant period, law enforcement officials attributed the discovery of these remains to the tragic but commonplace occurrences of exposure, accidental falls, or the inherent dangers of living without shelter during the harsh Russian winters. However, as the months turned into years, the frequency of these discoveries began to alarm local authorities. The pattern could no longer be dismissed as a series of isolated tragedies. The victims were predominantly older men, all found within the same geographic perimeter, all having sustained similar types of trauma. The Moscow police force officially recognized that a serial offender was operating within the confines of the park. A specialized task force was assembled, bringing together seasoned homicide detectives, forensic pathologists, and psychological profilers. The community was gripped by a growing sense of unease. The media dubbed the unknown assailant the Bitsa Park Maniac. Citizens were warned against walking alone in the forested areas, and the atmosphere in the surrounding neighborhoods shifted from tranquility to hypervigilance. Despite the heightened awareness, the perpetrator adapted, occasionally altering his victim profile to include women and younger individuals, further confounding the psychological profile being constructed by law enforcement. The investigation required a massive mobilization of resources. Police deployed undercover officers dressed as civilians, jogging or walking through the park in hopes of drawing out the suspect. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept the canopy during the evening hours. Canine units were dispatched to trace any residual scents near the sewer grates. Yet, profiling a highly organized offender presents unique difficulties. An organized offender is one who plans their actions meticulously, brings necessary implements to the scene, targets specific individuals, and takes deliberate steps to conceal the crime. They often lead seemingly normal lives, maintaining employment and residing within the very community they are terrorizing. This offender was no exception. He worked as a clerk at a local grocery store, interacting daily with the public, blending seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life. The duality of his existence allowed him to evade the massive dragnet cast by the Moscow police. The pivotal breakthrough in the investigation, the moment that shifted the momentum from the perpetrator to law enforcement, occurred in June of 2006. It is a common axiom in criminal investigations that no matter how meticulous an offender may be, the sheer volume of their actions eventually leads to a critical error. This error materialized with a victim named Marina Moskalyova. Unlike many of the previous victims, Marina was not an isolated individual living on the margins of society. She was a colleague of the perpetrator at the grocery store. When he invited her for a walk in Bitsa Park, she agreed. But she took a precautionary step that would ultimately break the case wide open. Before leaving her home, Marina left a handwritten note for her son. The note was simple but contained the most crucial piece of forensic evidence in the entire investigation. It stated that she was going for a walk with Alexander, and it included his mobile phone number. When Marina failed to return home, her son immediately contacted the authorities and provided them with the note. This single piece of paper catalyzed a rapid and highly coordinated law enforcement response. The investigation transitioned heavily into the realm of digital forensics and telecommunications analysis. Detectives immediately subpoenaed the records associated with the mobile phone number provided in the note. The telecommunications data provided a digital footprint, confirming that the phone belonged to Alexander Pichushkin and that it had been pinging cell towers in the vicinity of Bitsa Park during the window of Marina's disappearance. Furthermore, investigators retrieved a metro transit ticket from Marina's belongings. By cross-referencing the timestamp on the transit ticket with the closed-circuit television system of the Moscow Metro, digital forensic analysts were able to isolate the exact moment Marina entered the transit system. The surveillance footage provided undeniable visual evidence. It showed Marina Moskalyova walking alongside Alexander Pichushkin, heading toward the park. Armed with the handwritten note, the telecommunications data, and the definitive video surveillance, law enforcement moved swiftly to apprehend the suspect. The arrest was executed with precision, ensuring that the suspect had no opportunity to destroy evidence or pose a threat to the arresting officers. When detectives entered his apartment, they were searching for physical evidence that could link him to the crimes. What they discovered went far beyond a standard piece of trace evidence. It provided a direct window into the psychological framework of the offender. Prominently displayed in his living quarters was a standard chessboard. However, this chessboard was not being used for the game. Upon closer inspection, investigators realized that numbers and dates had been meticulously attached to the squares of the board. 61 of the 64 squares were filled. This physical artifact corroborated the most chilling aspect of the offender's pathology. The chessboard was a ledger, a visual representation of his morbid goal to complete the board, equating human lives to captured pawns in his deeply distorted internal narrative. The interrogation of Alexander Pichushkin is a subject of extensive study in the field of criminal psychology. Typically, suspects facing overwhelming evidence will either invoke their right to silence, attempt to minimize their involvement, or display signs of profound distress. Pichushkin, however, exhibited a starkly different demeanor. He was cooperative, articulate, and disturbingly enthusiastic about detailing his actions. He viewed the interrogation room not as a place of legal jeopardy, but as a stage to broadcast his perceived accomplishments. He guided detectives through the vast expanse of Bitsa Park, pointing out the specific sewer shafts and drainage pipes where he had concealed the remains. His memory for the geographical details and the specific sequences of events was extraordinarily precise, a hallmark of an offender who frequently relived the experiences in his mind. He openly admitted to the investigators that his ultimate objective was to surpass the victim count of Andrei Chikatilo, one of the most notorious serial offenders in Russian history. This competitive drive, the need to achieve a grotesque high score, underscored the complete absence of empathy and the profound narcissism that defined his psychological profile. The legal proceedings commenced in 2007, capturing the attention of the international community. The Russian judicial system, particularly in high-profile cases of this magnitude, operates with strict protocols to ensure security and order. Inside the Moscow City Court, the defendant was placed within a reinforced glass enclosure, a standard procedure for individuals deemed highly dangerous or at risk of public retaliation. The trial was a grueling marathon of forensic presentations, expert testimonies, and emotional endurance for the families of the victims. The prosecution meticulously laid out the timeline of the offenses, utilizing the digital evidence from the metro surveillance, the telecommunications data, and the physical evidence of the chessboard. Forensic pathologists provided clinical, detailed testimonies regarding the nature of the trauma sustained by the victims. They explained the complex science of recovering and identifying remains from the subterranean water systems, detailing the use of dental records and advanced genetic profiling to restore the identities of those who had been lost. Psychological experts were called to the stand to dissect the defendant's mental state. They testified that while he suffered from a severe antisocial personality disorder and narcissism, he was fully cognizant of the illegality and the moral gravity of his actions. He was legally sane, capable of complex planning, and entirely responsible for the devastation he had caused. Throughout these highly technical and emotional testimonies, the defendant remained safely behind the glass, often observing the proceedings with a detached, analytical expression, occasionally attempting to interrupt the judge to claim responsibility for even more unsolved disappearances. A final, desperate attempt to exert control over his narrative. The most profound and impactful moments of the trial, however, belonged to the families of the victims. The courtroom provided a space for the victim impact statements, a crucial component of the justice process that shifts the focus away from the offender and back to the human cost of the crimes. Mothers, children, and siblings stood before the court, speaking of the immense voids left in their lives. They spoke of the elderly fathers who simply wanted a quiet walk in the park, and the vulnerable individuals whose struggles did not diminish their inherent value as human beings. Through these statements, the victims were reclaimed from being mere statistics or numbers on a chessboard. Their legacies, their histories, and their humanity were firmly re-established in the public record. The trial served not only as a mechanism for legal accountability, but as a vital community reckoning, acknowledging the inherent dignity of every individual, regardless of their social standing or economic status. In October of 2007, the judicial process reached its conclusion. After deliberating on the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence, the witness, testimonies, and the defendant's own extensive confessions, the court delivered its verdict. Alexander Pichushkin was found guilty of 48 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. The Russian legal system, having placed a moratorium on capital punishment, handed down the most severe penalty available. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the stipulation that the first 15 years be served in solitary confinement within a maximum security penal colony. The sentence ensured that he would permanently be removed from society, stripped of the control and the notoriety he so desperately craved, confined to an existence where he could never again treat human life as a game. The resolution of the Bitsa Park investigation left a profound and lasting impact on the city of Moscow and the broader field of criminal investigation. In the aftermath of the trial, significant changes were implemented regarding the security and maintenance of urban green spaces. Bitsa Park saw the installation of extensive emergency call boxes, increased lighting along the main thoroughfares, and enhanced regular patrols by law enforcement. The subterranean sewer systems were thoroughly inspected and secured to prevent future access. For the law enforcement community, the case served as a critical educational paradigm. It highlighted the absolute necessity of robust missing persons databases, the importance of cross-referencing cases involving marginalized populations, and the incredible power of digital forensics and surveillance technology in tracking organized offenders. Furthermore, the case forced a societal reflection on the vulnerability of the isolated and the marginalized. It underscored the reality that a community's safety is deeply intertwined with how it protects its most defenseless members. The tragedy of the Chessboard Killer is a stark reminder of the darkness that can take root when empathy is entirely absent, and human lives are reduced to abstract concepts. The meticulous police work, the advancements in forensic science, and the unwavering dedication of the investigative task force ultimately dismantled this reign of terror, bringing a sense of closure to a wounded city. As we examine the complexities of this investigation, from the psychological origins of the offender to the forensic triumphs that led to his capture, we are left to ponder the broader implications for our own communities. The justice system succeeded in halting the violence and securing a life sentence, but it cannot undo the profound loss experienced by dozens of families. When an individual views the world as a strategic game devoid of human consequence, how can society better identify and protect the vulnerable before they become part of a tragic pattern? And what is our collective responsibility to ensure that no one in our community is ever treated as merely a pawn?